Elden Ring's DLC is quite challenging. It's so difficult that you have longtime fans saying FromSoft has crossed the line. They've gone too far. So with that in mind, I decided to play through the DLC with a level 1 character. But here's the problem. I'm not that good. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm decent at these games, but a level 1 challenge typically demands a level of perfection and mastery that I simply don't have. So that brings us to this video. Can someone like me beat the DLC at level 1? If I took advantage of every tool, tactic, broken build, glitch, and exploit, could I do it? That's what I wanted to answer, and that's what this video is about. And to take it one step further, I also wanted to not only beat the DLC, but defeat every Remembrance boss along the way. So for the next however many minutes, I'll walk you through my no leveling run for Elden Ring's DLC. But first, here's the sponsored part of the video. Dang, I sure am hungry.
I implore thee, partake of my stew.
Oh geez, thanks Hornsent Grandam. I love home-cooked meals. Let's read its item description. Having long gone cold, this soup gives off a rank, sour smell. Oh.
If the flavour doth thy tongue offend, I care not if thou throwest it away.
Yeah, I think I probably will. I'm sorry.
Surely thou must hunger.
I do hunger, but don't worry because this video is sponsored by Factor.
What has come over thee?
In case you've somehow never heard of them, Factor provides fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Every week, there's a menu of 35 options, like Calorie Smart, Keto, Vegan and Veggie, or my favorite, Protein Plus.
Wolf down every crumb.
That's right, Grandam. The food is actually good. I thought the Southwestern style beef was solid. And to prepare it, all you need to do is stick it in the microwave for 2 minutes. That's easier than mispronouncing Erdtree. I mean Erdtree. So, if you want to try it for yourself, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code IronPineapple50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code IronPineapple50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Wow, I'm not hungry anymore.
'Tis such relief I cannot express.
Now here's the rest of the video. To begin, I loaded up my old level 1 character that I used for the base game, but I gave him an updated design to reflect the passage of time. Then I entered the DLC area. The very first thing I did was run around and grab as many Erdtree fragments as I could. The map is actually incredibly open right from the start, and by my count, you can collect 34 out of the 50 total fragments in the game without needing to kill a single main or side boss. Here's a map outlining all the locations and how this is possible. I won't cover the details of me grabbing all these fragments for the sake of brevity, but I will point out a couple notable ways that the map is connected in case you're unaware. First, defeating Rolana is not required to reach Shadow Altus. Instead, if you ride southeast of Castle Ensis, you'll find a sealed spirit spring that can launch you up to the Fort of Reprimand, and from here, you have access to the rest of the region. After that, you might think that defeating the Golden Hippo is required to access parts of the Shadow Keep, but no. There's a back entrance, and from that back entrance, you'll eventually make it to the Specimen Storehouse. And if you just hop over the railing, you'll make it to the first floor and have access to the rest of the area. Then from here, you can reach either the ancient ruins of Rau, or take the hidden coffin behind the wall to the lower waterfall area that precedes the Abyssal Woods. So yeah, you can go almost everywhere right at the start. Of those 34 fragments I collected, I did still need to kill 3 of the overworld hippos, but they're quite easy, and since a health bar doesn't appear at the bottom of the screen when fighting them, I'm not counting them as bosses. To kill them, I use the Smith Script Spear with an added blood affinity. On horseback, I think this weapon is incredibly underrated. It costs 0 FP to throw, and, more importantly, you don't need to slow down to throw it. Other ranged options like spells, incantations, and longbows do require you to slow down, so being able to maintain your speed while attacking is notable for the spear. The only thing you really need to keep in mind is that the range isn't great, and if you get too far away, there's heavy fall-off damage. But yeah, this is solid, especially when you factor in the extra bleed damage too. Anyway, I spent a couple hours just running around and collecting all these fragments. With these fragments, I raised my Erdtree blessing to level 14, giving me a 90% boost to my attack power. I would continue to keep raising my blessing level as I progressed the run, but it's worth pointing out that the attack power bonus from the blessing caps at 105% when you hit level 20. So already, before I even challenged a single boss, I was pretty close to that cap. Next, I wanted a better weapon, so I went to the Prospect Town to kill Blood Fiends until one of them dropped the Blood Fiend's Arm Colossal Weapon. I had heard the stories about how powerful this Forbidden Turkey leg could be, and I wanted to see if it would work on a level 1 character. After getting the weapon, I leveled it up, gave it the Cragblade weapon skill, gave it the blood affinity, and then went to test it out on the Dancing Lime. Spoiler alert, yes, it works, even with an unoptimized setup that doesn't take advantage of buffs properly. This was my first try with the weapon. First, I summoned the Great Shield soldiers to hold aggro since they're cheap and durable. Once they had aggro, I backed off to use Cragblade. This adds 15% extra physical damage and 10% extra stance damage for 60 seconds. From here, the rest of the fight is me going for charged heavy attacks when the boss isn't looking. This weapon has a unique property where heavy attacks cause a small blood AoE that causes additional bleed buildup. This makes it absurdly quick at proccing bleed, and as an added bonus, these charged heavies stagger bosses quickly too. 2 charged heavies is all it took to stagger the Dancing Lion. And again, this was my first try with an unoptimized setup. I could have gotten the damage quite a bit higher if I bothered to use buffs. To finish out the fight, look at this absolute hero taking all the lightning breath while I land the heavy attack. Super fun weapon and an encouraging start to the run. If you're curious, here are the rest of the details of my setup. Anyway, like I said, this is far from optimal, and I think a couple talismans could have been swapped out for something better, but yeah, this is what I had. To further test out this build, I decided to take on Rolana next. This time, I buffed myself before walking in with the Golden Vow Ash of War for an 11.5% boost to my attack power for 45 seconds, alongside the Flame Grant Me Strength incantation for a 20% physical boost for 30 seconds. I basically followed the same strategy of just waiting for openings to land a heavy attack while my summons held aggro. As expected, this weapon melted her. It's just so much damage. As I was about to finish her off, I purposefully slowed down and stopped attacking. You're probably wondering why. Is he stupid? Does he know? Well, actually, this was my attempt at being funny because I wanted to end the fight with the Erdtree Great Shield. I let her kill my summons and then waited for her to launch a magic projectile at me. And then boom, the Golden Retaliation skill finished her off. Another boss down. Next up, Commander Gaius. This is where the real cheese begins. Okay, so the first thing with this one is I wanted to use Mogwyn's Sacred Spear as my weapon. In order to hold it, I needed at least 27 arcane. So alongside the talismans I was already wearing, I equipped the Silver Tear Mask because it provides an additional 8 points of arcane at the cost of 5% less physical attack power. Essentially, the idea was to use the Blood Boon Ritual skill on the weapon to hit Gaius through the wall. This skill has a very large AoE, and has the potential for, quite frankly, a silly amount of damage. But even with the wall, pulling this off was easier said than done because several of the boss's attacks could still hit me. So it took some trial and error to figure out what was and wasn't safe. Anyway, here's what I did. I ran in and immediately took a left to hide behind the corner. I then waited a beat to get one cast of Blood Boon Ritual in because Gaius is seemingly immune to damage during his charge forward move, and only becomes vulnerable again as the attack finishes. Here's what I'm talking about, by the way, when I say that he's immune to damage during this charge move. Just wanted to show you an example so I don't sound crazy. After this, I ran back around the corner as Gaius got stuck on the other side of the wall. There's a bit of RNG with this part because there's a few different moves he can do, but I got lucky and got off a huge chunk of damage. In case you didn't know, Blood Boon Ritual is a 3-part move, and the third thrust lasts extra long for even more damage. I then back up a bit, cover some FP, and avoid the gravity attack. I get a bit more damage in, listen for the second phase audio cue, and then immediately start rolling back to avoid all the rocks. Honestly, very close to dying here. I then run back in, hear him doing his charge attack into the wall, and wait a beat once again to let him finish the move so I can maximize my damage output. I'm close to winning, but he uses his gravity bomb move, forcing me to move back. And unfortunately, this also gets him unstuck from the wall. I go for the finisher next to the entrance, get some damage off, and then narrowly dodge his attack. From here, I'm in full panic mode and just start mashing R1. I get one hit off, and then I'm bumped by some move, and shockingly don't die from it. I then land the killing blow and die to the gravity bomb at the exact same time. But fuck it, that counts. I'll take it. My reward for this was 5 more Shadow Tree fragments, and that was enough to bump me up to Blessing level 16. Next, I decided to try out another strategy, Thrusting Shields. For this, I grabbed the Carrion Thrusting Shield from the Shadow Keep and infused it with blood. I then went over to fight the Black Jail Knight to test it out. With this weapon, you can block and attack at the same time by pressing R1 while holding L1. This is effective in many different scenarios, but it's especially effective against NPC bosses. Even with low stamina on a level 1 character, I could trade hits with the Black Jail Knight, and it kinda just worked. I still had to watch my stamina and back off when it got low, and I still had to heal a couple times since the shield only had 89% physical damage negation when infused with blood, but this worked great. Here were the talismans I chose as well. Anyway, this is a very effective strategy for dealing with enemies and bosses like this, so it's great to keep in mind for standard runs on characters with lots of stamina. After seeing how well this worked on the Black Jail Knight, I decided to take on the Ancient Dragon Man next so I could get access to the Jagged Peak. Not too much to say about the fight, as it played out pretty much the same as the last one. I just had to keep an eye on my health and stamina while poking over and over. Before I progressed through the Jagged Peak area properly, I ran down the Charo's hidden grave to kill the last overworld hippo with my throwing spear to get one more Shadow Tree fragment. I then went back and continued my climb toward the top of the jagged peak. On the way, I came across the two dragons fighting each other. I could have skipped them, but I thought it would be kind of fun to take them out. Basically, I identified which dragon was winning the fight, and then threw rot and poison pots at it. I then sat back and watched them continue to fight for a couple minutes, while the stronger one took extra damage from the poison and scarlet rot. The dragon I poisoned still won the fight, but by the time it had defeated the other dragon, it had less than half its health left. To finish the fight, I summoned my Great Shield soldiers to hold aggro while I fired rot arrows with my short bow to inflict rot one more time. This nearly did the trick, but I still had to pull out my throwing spear and throw a few spears in the dragon's head to finish it off. I enjoyed this encounter, and I got on my first try. As I kept riding up toward the peak, I came across another Shadow Tree fragment next to some boulders, and just past this was the ancient dragon Senesax. Once again, I could have skipped him, but I wanted to fight him for fun. So one of the main things about this fight is that he does a lot of lightning attacks, and since he's in an area with lots of water, that makes these attacks extra dangerous as the lightning spreads through the water. However, despite this appearing to be a seemingly tough encounter, I just used some of the same strategies I'd already been using. First, I poisoned and rotted him at the start of the fight, and then I just kept throwing spears at his head from horseback. I pretty much just weaved in and out of throwing range as I attacked, and only fully backed off when he did an especially big attack. I occasionally hopped over the lightning in the water as well. Headshots with the spear do a surprising amount of damage. Plus, I managed to proc bleed a couple times. This really wasn't bad at all, and like every other fight so far, I didn't even need to learn his moveset in any meaningful capacity. I just moved out of range whenever he was doing an attack. Again, don't sleep on this weapon for horseback boss fights. With Senesax down, I reached the next site of grace where I leveled up my blessing level to 17. And that brings us to Bale. Oh man. The first thing I tried was summoning Egon and just winging it. I'm sure many of you know this already, but in case you don't, any NPCs that are summoned from inside a boss arena, such as Egon, don't increase the boss's total HP, unlike summons from outside the arena. I tried fighting with my spear at first, but it wasn't going great. I just didn't know this fight nearly well enough to do a no-hit run. I then switched to the Smith Script Great Hammer. Not much thought went into this decision, beyond me thinking that throwing a big hammer in Bale's face would be effective, but it was not. I also tried summoning Tish to help. Normally I couldn't summon her because she costs too much FP, but by using this Cerulean Hidden Tier, I had access to whatever summon I wanted, since it grants infinite FP for 10 seconds. She was relatively helpful, and even helped get me to phase 2, but that's about as far as I got. If I truly wanted to beat Bale without getting good, I would need some actual cheese. Fortunately, I found an incredibly stupid solution. I cast the Unseen Form Sorcery, and then used the Assassin's Gambit Ash of War. Both of these have basically the same effect in that they make you partially invisible and reduce the range at which enemies can spot you. Shockingly, these apparently stack, and even more shockingly, this works against the boss. If I just stayed along the edge of the arena, he couldn't spot me. From here, I ran all the way around to the back while reapplying Unseen Form and Assassin's Gambit along the way. Then, I snuck up on Bale and pulled out Poison Mist. Poison Mist is unique in that it deals no direct damage, meaning that I could poison Bale without getting aggro. Then, I just had to keep reapplying poison for the next 25 minutes. And yeah, I'll fast forward this for obvious reasons, but fuck man, it actually worked. As a reminder, for the purposes of this video, it doesn't matter how unintentional or cheesy the solution is. If it gets the job done, I'll take it. Next, just for fun, I want to show you a cool way of killing the furnace golems. For this, I needed the Bolt of Grandsax weapon, which requires 40 dex to hold, but this is totally doable on a level 1 character, even without Godric's Great Rune. Anyway, this weapon has a skill that lets you throw a giant lightning bolt, but while charging up the throw, your character will hover slightly off the ground. This actually moves your character's hurt box off the ground as well, and thus, you can avoid the Furnace Golem's fire stomps pretty easily without needing to worry about dodging or jumping. I love that this is possible. After staggering him 3 times, he falls over. But there's a bonus trick you can do too. After landing the critical on his face, there's actually enough time to quickly run to the side and throw a hefty furnace pot into his head for massive damage. I still had to poke him 2 more times since he had a sliver of health left, but with this strategy, I only need to knock him over once to deal enough damage to kill him. Since these guys are normally pretty tedious to deal with, I highly encourage you to try this for yourself the next time you fight one. Next up, the Golden Hippo. A lot of people don't like this guy and think he's pretty tough, but there's actually a really easy way to deal with him. For this, I used the Iron Greatsword and added the Impaling Thrust Ash of War. It doesn't need to be this greatsword specifically, but I just happen to choose this one. And then, that's it for the setup. From here, the fight is very straightforward. I ran in, dodged his grab attack, and then kept running toward him as he ran past. I then lined myself up near his hind leg because his follow-up attack from this position would consistently miss me, allowing me to attack at the same time. During this window, I did 1 Impaling Thrust, 1 uncharged heavy attack, and then 1 more Impaling Thrust. And then boom, He's staggered. I land the critical hit, and then repeat the same combo of Impaling Thrust, Heavy Attack, and Impaling Thrust again. This is so quick that he doesn't get the chance to start a single attack and gets staggered mid-phase 2 transition. I get another critical hit, and simply repeat this combo again. It just works. He once again had no time to begin any attacks on me. After the third critical hit, it only took one more attack to finish him off. So yeah, next time you're struggling with this guy, keep this strategy in mind. My reward for killing him was 2 more Shadow Tree fragments. After that, since I was in the neighborhood, I decided to take on Mesmer next. He was a serious potential roadblock for this run. So I think Mesmer is a great fight, but I don't know him nearly well enough to essentially do a no-hit run. That didn't stop me from trying a few times though to set a baseline. Also, every time I attempted this fight, I would summon Hornson at the start, because like Egon, his summon sign was inside the boss room, so summoning him wouldn't make the boss tankier. After struggling for a while, I decided to try an actual strategy. My first idea was to try using the Impenetrable Thorn sorcery. I had heard good things about this spell, and I was curious if it would work on a level 1 character. You can pick this up after dropping off this ledge in the Shadow Keep. I also used the Demi-Human Queen Staff, because I think that's the best option when you have really low stats, but I could be wrong. I decided to test out the spell on the Great Red Bear in Shadow Altus. Even with a very unoptimized setup on a level 1 character, this spell fucking shreds. It does tons of damage and procs bleed very easily. By using my Great Shield soldiers to hold aggro, I dealt 30,000 damage to the bear within 12 seconds. One thing to note though is that every time I cast the spell, I dealt 50 damage to myself. Normally this isn't a big deal, but when I only have 400 HP, it's something that actually starts to matter. Anyway, I decided to try it for real against Mesmer. My strategy boiled down to summoning Hornsent to hold aggro while I tried to get some hits in from behind. Unfortunately, this ultimately didn't work great for me because the spell was just a little too slow and Mesmer was just a little too fast. And after my Opaline Bubble Tier wore off, one hit was all it took to end the run. Additionally, Mesmer jumps around a lot, so that would cause the thorns to miss fairly often. Therefore, I decided to bring the turkey leg back out. It hadn't failed me yet. I also added the Seppuku Ash of War to a sword to stab myself as part of the buffing setup, since proccing bleed on myself activates the damage boost from Lord of Blood's Exaltation and the White Mask. And a quick note about buffing, since I'm starting to pile them on now. Aside from knowing that certain buffs don't stack, the main thing to know is that the order you buff should be from longest to shortest duration. I'm sure that's obvious to a lot of you, but yeah, it's worth mentioning. And since the blood buff from Seppuku only lasts for 20 seconds, that was the final buff I would activate each time. Anyway, it took a lot of tries, but here's what I did. I ran in, summoned Hornsent, and then dodged the opening attack. Then I landed a charged heavy. Next, I tried backing off to have Hornsent take aggro, but I got hit. Luckily, this was fine since I had the Opaline Bubble Tier to account for mistakes like this. Then, after Hornsent had aggro, I went for a second charged heavy. This was enough to bleed and stagger Mesmer. I got the critical hit, and then did another charged heavy as he was getting up. This was enough to bleed him again and send him into phase 2. Next, I immediately used an uplifting aromatic to give myself another bubble shield. This functions basically the same as the Opaline Bubble Tier while giving an additional 10% physical damage boost. I then dodged his phase 2 opening attack and hit him with another charged heavy, followed by a light attack where I purposefully traded hits with him because of the bubble shield. I dodged and then hit him with another light attack to stagger him once again. I got the critical hit, procced bleed, and then landed one more charged heavy and one more light attack as he was getting up. And there you go, that was enough to do it. The stagger and bleed damage from the turkey leg was just too good. Mesmer down. Moving on, I wanted to go to the Abyssal Woods, but in order to get there, I would need to go through the Dark Light Catacombs. Navigating through this area was a whole ordeal in itself, but the main event was the boss, the Elder Inquisitor. For the sake of variety, I wanted to try out a new strategy. I put the Carrion Sovereignty Ash of War on my Iron Greatsword, which, by the way, you can get this Ash of War from a scarab next to the Cathedral of Manus Matir. I also used these talismans to boost this setup. Anyway, this skill does an absurd amount of stance damage on top of providing hyper armor. The hyper armor wouldn't help me here since I would die in one hit, but the stance damage seemed fun. My strategy was running in, backstabbing the boss, and as he was getting up, I'd go for the Carrion Sovereignty follow-up. This did take luck since he would sometimes teleport away or kill me instantly, but sometimes he did a magic attack that I could duck under. This allowed me to instantly stagger him and get a follow-up critical hit. This was almost enough to kill him, but sadly, stamina was an issue, and I would usually just die immediately after. After trying this for a while, I decided to say fuck it and use the turkey leg again. One thing that's great about it for this fight is that a charged heavy into a light attack was enough to stagger the boss every time, and this was a lot easier to land than Carrion Sovereignty. It took a few tries, but I got him. With that, I gained access to the Abyssal Woods. While here, I grabbed the 2 fragments in the church, as well as the one on a side path by some rats, and I used these to level up my blessing to level 18. This is the highest I could go before reaching the final area of the DLC. I also used the same stealth strategy I had used against Bale by stacking Unseen Form and Assassin's Gambit to navigate through the woods with ease. As long as I wasn't directly in the enemy's faces, they wouldn't see me. And that brings us to Midra. Midra was tough. At first, I tried using the turkey leg with the great shield and the deflecting Hartier, and this was fine enough to get me through phase 1, but once again, I'm not nearly good enough at this game to fight Midra straight up like this. So I brought out the big guns, the lightning perfume bottle with the rolling sparks Ash of War. This has been patched out, but here's how it worked. The rolling sparks Ash of War essentially sends out a line of explosions with separate hitboxes. However, if you aim this skill at the ground, all of the explosions condense into a single point, allowing you to deal way more damage than intended on single targets. My setup was the Ritual Sword Talisman, Perfumer's Talisman, Lightning Scorpion Talisman, and the Shard of Alexander. I also used the Lightning Shrouding Crack tier for extra lightning damage, alongside the Stone Barb Crack tier for extra stance damage. In order to have enough stats to hold this weapon while utilizing all these talismans, I also had to equip the Curse Blade Mask and Godric's Great Rune. Another note, there was another bug with this skill where using Golden Vow would cause it to deal 0 damage. No idea why this happened, but sadly it meant that I couldn't use Golden Vow to buff myself at the start of the fight. For the fight itself, I ran forward and behind Midra as he did his opening Frenzy Spray. This gave me just enough time to summon the Great Shield soldiers. Then I backed off so they could take aggro. And while they were fighting, I switched my Ritual Sword Talisman for the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, stabbed myself with Seppuku, then switched back to the Ritual Sword Talisman. This is because the damage buff from bleeding persists even after taking the talisman off. I then used an uplifting aromatic to give myself a shield and ran in. I positioned myself behind Midra and just kept throwing rolling sparks to the ground repeatedly. This allowed me to rack up nearly 40,000 damage in a couple seconds, and I almost killed him before he transitioned to phase 2. Then I purposefully tanked the hit from the explosion attack using the bubble shield so I could stay close, and after avoiding one more attack, I finished him off. Midra down. To keep the perfume bottle shenanigans rolling, I decided to fight Matir next. I basically used the same strategy with the exception of throwing a couple hefty rot pots to inflict rot at the start of the fight because I needed a bit more damage. The interesting thing about Matir is that because she's so big, I could actually use rolling sparks as intended by throwing it forward as the explosions would still all land. So I mixed those in alongside a few ground throws. Not too much to say here aside from the fact that this skill was busted and being able to deal this much damage with a level 1 character was silly. In an effort to keep this video from turning into me just winning every fight with perfume bottles, I decided to switch it up with another detour. Let's check on our friend, the Ghost Flame Dragon. How many hits will it take to kill him? 1, 2, 3. What the fuck just happened and how did I do this? So basically, Ghost Flame Dragons are classified as undead enemies, and as such, there's a couple abilities we can make use of that heavily boost our damage against anything undead. The first is the Last Rite skill on the Golden Epitaph weapon. This gives a 100% boost to damage against undead enemies. The other major component of this strat is the Sacred Blade skill, which you just saw me use. This gives an additional 100% extra damage against undead, and on top of that, it deals pure holy damage, which all undead are extra weak against. So with these weapon skills, plus the relevant talismans and holy Shrouding Crack tier, I was able to deal over 10,000 damage a hit. But it gets even better, because I did the same setup against the Death Rate bird in Charo's Hidden Grave, and I dealt a whopping 31,000 damage with a single swing. Insane. I think this was possible because it's even weaker to holy damage than the Ghost Flame Dragon, plus its head acts as an additional weak spot multiplier. I'm not totally sure though. Now, why did I show you all that? Well, it actually was just prep for the next boss, the Putrescent Knight. Believe it or not, it's classified as an undead enemy, which means it's very susceptible to the same strat. So I dropped in, summoned my Great Shield soldiers to take aggro, did my buffing setup, and then I was able to kill it with just 4 hits from Sacred Blade. I love that this is possible, and it's incredibly satisfying seeing this sort of damage potential on a level 1 character without needing to abuse glitches. Speaking of abusing glitches, the Erdtree avatar is up next. So the issue with this guy is that he has 3 phases, and that meant I needed to find, at a minimum, 3 openings to use my perfume bullshit. Again, I'm not that good, and I don't know this fight very well. So this was very hard to do without messing up. So instead of putting in the effort to find those openings, I decided to use something far more stupid. I brought out Mogwyn's Sacred Spear again. I then ran to the left edge of the boss arena and walked off the cliff in this one specific spot. This allowed me to land on a ledge without falling to my death. And from here, I was able to repeatedly use Blood Boon Ritual to safely kill the boss from below. Here's the cool part. When the Erdtree avatar revived itself, it tried to match my elevation, but since I'm below the arena, it spawned underneath and then fell to its death, meaning that I only needed to kill him once instead of the usual 3 times. Another boss down, literally. I was now ready to head toward the end of the game, and that meant Romina was up next. This was another opportunity to use the perfume bottles to win relatively easily, but I wanted to once again use the least amount of effort whenever possible, and that meant Mogwyn's Spear was staying out. So I ran in, summoned the Great Shield soldiers to hold aggro, and then ran to the back left corner of the arena. From there, it was simply a matter of jumping on top of the flower buds and mushrooms to get to a part of the arena where Romina couldn't reach me. This was honestly kind of finicky, but as you can see, I eventually got it. I'm sure you can all guess what happened next. Bloodboon Ritual to the rescue. This was another very cheesy kill, but in my defense, a couple of those jumps were pretty hard, so in a way, I still felt like I earned it. And with that, I was now able to access the final area of the game, Enter Ilum. The first thing I did was run around and grab the remaining Erdtree fragments to raise my blessing level to the max. Once again, the stealth strat from earlier came in handy here because some of these enemies are a nightmare to run past normally. The NPC fight with Letta was up next, but first, let's rewind a bit. Before I burned the tree and entered the final area, I strategically dealt with all of the NPCs. Ansbach and Tiolier was straightforward. I just completed their quest lines, thereby giving me access to summon them both for the fight against Letta. However, for Freya, I purposefully ignored her since giving her the letter from Ansbach makes her show up to fight you alongside Letta, but now she was just gone. Similarly, I told Moore to be sad forever since this too has the effect of getting him to not show up to fight you at the end. I also didn't have to worry about Hornsent showing up because we were chill after I summoned him to fight Mesmer. Thus, I turned what could have been, in a worst case scenario, a 1v5 NPC fight into a 3v2, and it was totally worth it because this fight was a breeze. I just brought out the thrusting shield while also relying on my summons to help out. Dryleaf Dane went down pretty quick, and then once Letta came out, it was already over. She barely got the chance to attack. And now, the final boss, Radahn. So cards on the table, I felt like I was doomed. On my first playthrough of the DLC, this was the one fight where I relied on spirit summons to help me through it, and even then, it was still incredibly difficult. Let's just say FromSoft was very bold in designing a fight like this. As for this level 1 playthrough though, I decided it was time to bring out the perfume bottles again. Even with spirit summons, finding openings was still pretty tricky, and while I did successfully make it to phase 2, I just didn't feel like I had the damage to find enough openings to finish the fight. There were definitely a few ways I could optimize the setup further with a couple more buffs, but before I attempted that, I had a dumb idea. Would the stealth trick work again? Yeah, apparently it would. Using Unseen Form and Assassin's Gambit prevented Radahn from seeing me, and for whatever reason, he slowly walked all the way to the back of the arena, and when he reached the edge, he would just stare at the wall. From here, I was in position to cast Poison Mist just like I did with Bale. I sat here for a while, and it seemed to be working. Unfortunately, this fight has a cutscene transition for phase 2, and that meant that upon reaching the HP threshold to trigger the cutscene, I would be teleported to the center of the arena and could no longer hide. This wasn't gonna work. That meant it was up to the Rolling Sparks glitch, and I thought utilizing every possible buff like the Poison and Frenzy buff setups could maybe do it. It was late though, so I decided to call it a night and try the next day. I woke up to the Elden Ring patch notes, and among these notes, they had fixed the perfume bottle glitch. There was no hope. I'm truly not good enough at dodging to deal with Radahn's second phase without getting hit. With this new update, I didn't have any tricks or tools left. So yeah, that's it. That's the end of the run. Thanks for watching. Wait, what's that? Holy shit, we're back. So yeah, I got Let Me Solo Her to help me. Like the base game level 1 run I did 2 years ago, I thought co-op would be a fitting way to end it. This run was all about beating the DLC without being good by using every resource at my disposal, and technically that included co-op summons. But yeah, in case you somehow don't know who Let Me Solo Her is, he's the dude who helped hundreds of people beat Melania by fighting her for them while they stood back and watched. And that's exactly what my plan was here. I took out the binoculars to get some good angles. His build consisted of 3 different Antspur rapiers that were each infused with a different affinity: poison, cold, and bleed. This weapon comes with built-in Scarlet Rot buildup, so alongside inflicting Scarlet Rot, he would cycle through each of these weapons to apply all of their status effects. Poison and Rot were especially useful for phase 2 because there are just so few openings to deal damage, like when Radahn flies up into the sky or does some other bullshit. Normally he's not taking damage, but with Poison and Rot, he's slowly dying the whole time. Anyway, Let Me Solo Her was a pro, and I want to apologize to him because even though my one job was to stand back and watch, I fucked that up multiple times. During phase 2, there's this one move that hits the entire arena that I simply was not prepared for. I didn't realize it hit literally the whole arena. On top of that, the meteor attack kept getting me. When Radahn gets low, he shoots up into the sky and crashes back down, and apparently he always targets the host at this part. Because I'm bad at dodging and never learned this move, you can imagine how that went. To help counteract my lack of skill, I tried using the Fingerprint Great Shield to block the meteor attack, but it didn't work. Fortunately though, the shield was pretty useful for blocking the arena-wide attack from the earlier part of the fight. But yeah, we needed to figure out the meteor attack to finish things. Here's what we did. When he launched up into the sky, we both just started jumping in place. And as you can see, this canceled the attack. Why did this work? Well, I'm not totally sure, but I think it has something to do with messing up his targeting, and when we're off the ground, he can't locate us with the attack properly. After that, we were in the home stretch. I mean, Let Me Solo Her was still fighting for his life, but I just had to sit back and watch. And by God, the legend did it. What a hero. I want to thank Let Me Solo Her very much for saving this video and helping me end it in a silly way. Alright, update. There was actually a way to cheese Radahn by myself. Even though the run is finished, I'm going to demonstrate it now because I think it's incredibly funny. Also, this does work on the current version of the game, which is version 1.13.2 at the time of this recording. So I actually had the right idea before. This involves the Unseen Form Assassin's Gambit stealth trick. However, instead of running directly behind Radahn to cast Poison Mist, I instead ran to the back left to this specific spot in the arena. From here, I threw one hefty rot pot, confirmed that it hit, proc Scarlet Rot, and then threw two hefty poison pots to stack on the damage. Lastly, I used the Mimic's Veil to turn into a tree. This was the key component I was missing before. You see, just like last time, I was waiting around for phase 2, but when it finally came, the Mimic's Veil prevented Radahn from seeing me. He investigated a bit, but then ultimately started to walk away toward the back of the arena again. However, this time, he was seemingly fading in and out of existence. After he reached the edge of the arena, I backed up a bit to give him that extra push to despawn or phase through the ground or whatever. And what do you know? He actually did it. He just died. What an incredible end. R.I.P. Miquella, R.I.P. Radahn. And yeah, that's it. Definitely a lot of cheese, but hey, that's how it goes for a run like this when the DLC is this hard. I wanted to beat the DLC at level 1 without being good at the game, and I feel like I accomplished that. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and keep an eye out for more videos soon. Take it easy. Also, as a little bonus, I'll include how I killed Moog to access the DLC. I showed this strat in the last video, the beating the DLC with nothing video, but yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You run in with the Bloodhound Fang, you use Moog's Shackle, and you pretty much just follow what you're seeing on screen, and it'll work, assuming you have the correct damage threshold. If you want a more detailed explanation, because I know this is not a good explanation, I'll link the video where I found the strat in the description below. But yeah, that's it for real. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy.